Right friends, welcome back to editorial discussion. So, this is the last lecture in this format. From Monday, that is May 1st onwards, I will divide all the current affairs into 4 formats and you will be very happy to learn that way. One is news of the day will be there Monday to Friday, and mini capsules will be there around 5 minutes, 7 minutes, because whenever some editorial appears, important points will be discussed in those mini capsules, and analysis capsules will be there which require total review of particular issue. Then weekend why and how and facts and figures will be there, where the items which we could not cover in these formats will appear there. So, without much repetition, probably please understand around 10 to 20% deliberately I want to repeat, because of the reason important aspects, if they are repeated then they will stick to your mind. So, without much repetition, we will bring the current affairs in 4 formats. News of the day, of course name will change and news of the day will be there, and these all will be uploaded directly. News of the day, mini capsules, analysis capsules, and weekend why and how and facts and figures. So, these 4 formats will take care of entire current affairs for any type of examination, and this format we devised after lot many experiments. So, I hope that we may be consistent with that format. All of you will also agree with that format, at least majority of you will agree with that format, right. So, this is all about the progress from first week. Next, one more thing is, in live for civil services aspirants, we will come up with 11 o'clock lecture. 11 o'clock session will be revision session. I do not want to take much time from you because you have to read so many other subjects also. So, from 11 o'clock to around 20 minutes or so, it will be live. PPTs will be available. Those whoever want further reading, they can refer the PPTs, and 11:30 we will discuss 20 questions. So, that will continue till June 15th, and that will take care of your examination needs as far as current affairs is concerned. And in addition to current affairs, most of the economy related issues will be covered, and contemporary issues with regard to geography will be covered, and we will try to cover maximum issues in the contemporary era with regard to environment, S&T and ecology. So, with this, almost 50 to 60% of your syllabus for civil services preliminary most likely to be covered in our lectures from Monday onwards. And whenever I say geography, whenever I say economy, please understand that pertains to the contemporary issues. And at the same time, as promised, policies and programs, economic survey and economy all will be completed. We are on way to complete those before civil services preliminary, and in addition to 9 modules whatever we have uploaded policies and programs, another 5 or 6 will come, and we already listed them and shortly they will be uploaded. Economic survey will start within 2-3 days along with economy. So, these modules will appear most likely from Monday onwards, right. So, this is our plan of action for your examinations, and I hope that you all will be benefited not only from preliminary perspective, from mains perspective also. Look at the first issue in 4 doses. First, malaria vaccine. Yesterday we discussed about malaria vaccine, 2 types of malaria vaccines, and at the same time we discussed about Ebola vaccine also. So, out of these 2 malaria vaccines, one came to the implementation stage. This is RTSS. RTSS is also known as Musquirix. So, this is injectable malaria vaccine, that is RTSS. Around 7,50,000 children aged 5 to 17 months in 3 countries of Africa, Ghana, Kenya and Malawi, and here it is recombinant protein based malaria vaccine. And if you go further, malaria causes annually 4,30,000 deaths, and out of these 4,30,000 deaths, 92% is accounted by Africa, and Africa also accounts for 90% of total 212 million new cases in 2015. So, under these circumstances, the introduction of this vaccine to 7,50,000 people aged 5 to 17 months in 3 countries of Africa assumed significance. Right. So, the first dose will be administered at about 5 months of age, and third dose has to be completed by 9 months of age. And one important point about this vaccine is, in the phase 3 trials, the efficacy of the vaccine was around 30% when children received all the 4 doses. Right. So, the efficacy is still not high. That is one important point. Then the concerns, this vaccine is manufactured by GlaxoSmithKline, and the concerns are its efficacy already low. In view of the low protection efficacy of the vaccine, and when it is tested in controlled clinical settings, its efficacy is just 30%. So, the pilot tests will be useful in evaluating the likelihood of replicating the immunization schedule in the context of routine healthcare settings. And the second point is the extent to which the vaccine reduces the all-cause mortality has to be evaluated. And another important point is, here excess cases of meningitis and cerebral malaria were noticed during the trials, and now these are to be ascertained whether it is because of vaccine or not. Right. So, less than optimum protection offered by this vaccine requires other methods also to be used so as to reduce the incidence of the disease. So, it is the good beginning, you can say. So, please do not forget, from examination perspective, 2 vaccines pertaining to malaria, and recently we discussed about Ebola vaccine also. Learning to run twice as fast. This article is with regard to Singh Committee recommendations. So, he himself wrote this article, and this is the lead article of the Hindu today, and several aspects came to the forefront. And Singh Committee, this is basically to review the FRBM Act, which was brought in 2003 with the mandate of 3% of fiscal deficit in comparison to GDP, but it was thrown to winds after 2008 financial crisis, and the fiscal deficit target is 3.2% of GDP for 17-18, and government committed 3% by 2018-19, and we discussed last week, if more fiscal deficit is there, what will happen? We discussed last week about this, what will happen if more fiscal deficit is there, and I am not going to repeat now. If somebody want, please go through this PPT. And what are Singh Committee recommendations? Here the major recommendations, of course, 3% of fiscal deficit to GDP by 2020, 2.5% by 2023, leave that apart. The most important paradigm shift recommendation, you can say, is by 2023 public debt must be limited to 60% of GDP. At present, it is 68% of GDP. If you look at the public debt is nothing but accumulation of fiscal deficit over a period of time, accumulation of borrowings both by the center as well as the states, that is public debt for the entire nation. So, public debt for center, it must be restricted to 40%, and for states 20%. And now this article is with regard to the challenges of restricting states debt to overall 20% of GDP by 2023. So, this article around 10-12 points are there, all 10-12 points pertaining to the difficulty in containing the public debt, or you can say debt of the states put together to 20% of GDP by Here the first and the foremost, I am directly going into the reasons, or you can say the apprehensions or the ground realities, whatever you call. What are the problems associated with achieving 20% target of debt to GDP by the states by 2023? So, this is the question now. Look at the points. First point, the spate of populist measures. Nowadays in our country, there is competition among the states, and that competition is with regard to populist schemes, and in the economic survey it was aptly called as competitive populism. Competitive populism. The competition must be there in delivering services like health and education, but unfortunately the competition is with regard to the populist schemes. So, the spate of populist measures as well as farm loan waivers are symptomatic of deteriorating state finances. This is one important aspect. If the populist schemes increase, like the farm waivers are required, I am not denying that, but it should be targeted in some other way. Farmers' distress is to be alleviated, no second thought about it, but there are several ways of alleviating the farmers' distress, and in fact loan waivers will spoil the credit culture altogether. Then populist measures, one state is competing with other state. 14th Finance Commission enhanced the borrowing limits up to 0.5% of GSDP for the states. This was conditional on debt to GSDP being less than or equal to 25%. Under these conditions only, that means here either debt to GSDP means gross state domestic product. So, debt to gross state domestic product ratio, if it is less than or equal to 25%, or interest payments being less than or equal to 10% of revenue receipts. Under these two circumstances, the borrowing limit is enhanced up to 0.5% of GSDP. And if you go by this, only 6 states during the last financial year are eligible for enhanced borrowing. Last year, only 6 states were eligible for enhanced borrowing, and it indicates fiscal prudence is not there in the states. So, out of 29 states, only 6 states were eligible for enhancing the borrowing limit. It indicates that the fiscal prudence is not satisfactory in the states. So, under these circumstances, this 20% target, to achieve that we have to see. Then Article 293 clause 3, as per Article 293 clause 3, it is a mandatory for a state to take the central government's approval for raising any loan if the state owes any outstanding liabilities to the latter. So, under the circumstances, when state government owes some money to the center, under those circumstances only state is required to take permission from the central government under Article 293 clause 3. So, the fundamental question is, what happens when states cease to have any outstanding liabilities to the central government? So, as per this article, states can go for borrowing without the central government approval when they do not owe any money to the central government. Then Union Cabinet permitted state government entities to directly borrow from bilateral partners without asking for the center again, directly subject to certain conditions. They can directly borrow for infrastructure projects, and this is possible only when India has got a bilateral partnership with other country. Right. So, here directly now states can borrow for vital infrastructure projects. And another point is combined market borrowings of all the states. Combined market borrowings of all the states have been rising consistently, and they increased to 28% in financial year 2016. And another important aspect is gross market borrowings of states through state development loans. So, state development loans are nothing but the state government's bonds issued, and RBI, they will be issued through Reserve Bank of India. So, state development loans, just like government securities by the central government, state development loans, they are issued by the Reserve Bank of India on behalf of state governments. And this SDLs, please understand, SDL maximum time period is 10 years. They are increased by 27% in financial year 2017. So, all these points indicate that the fiscal prudence is deteriorating in the states. Another burden on the state governments is the implementation of ODAI. ODAI is to bring the state utilities, state electricity distribution companies out of red. That burden is taken over by the state governments. So, this is another burden on the state governments. So, implementation of ODAI is another aspect which needs to be considered. Then recently central government gave rules and regulations with regard to exclusion of state governments from NSSF. So, National Small Savings Fund, and now central government said that state governments cannot utilize funds under National Small Savings Fund, and it gave some exception to some states, that is different story. And another point is current stock of state debt at 21% of GDP is underestimated, and in the state governments the biggest problem is there will be off budget expenditure. In budget they may not show it, there will be off budget expenditure through state public sector undertakings borrowings. States may have public sector undertakings and they borrow money for the spending by the states, and that will not be reflected in the state's budget. This is another fallacy in calculating this overall borrowings by the state governments, or you can say while calculating total debt to GDP ratio. This is one of the fallacies. State governments are going in for more and more off budget expenditures, and this was pointed out by CAG also several times. So, off budget public spending and miscategorization of budget data, this is another important aspect. Then quality of state expenditure is deteriorating. Here you see share of state's revenue expenditure in total expenditure is around 80%. And another important aspect is during the past 3 years, non-developmental expenditure has raised by over 50% because of populist measures by the state governments. One state after the other are going for competitive populism. Then the next point is expenditure on physical and social infrastructure. What is social infrastructure? Development of sewerage facilities, development of water supply facilities, development of schools, development of hospitals. This is creation of social infrastructure, and unfortunately it remained stagnant. Then 14th Finance Commission dropped fiscal discipline as the criteria for tax devolution and accommodated population and forest cover in its devolution formula. 14th Finance Commission in fact dropped this fiscal discipline clause, and they have taken this population and forest cover in its devolution formula. So, the most important aspect is all these things must be addressed before going in for the, or you can say to achieve the target of total 20% of public debt by the states by 2023 in comparison to GDP. Most important point is borrowing today to pay tomorrow is by no means financially viable for long term growth, right friends. So, there is an expected question in the UPSC Civil Services Mains examination that please explain the constraints or critically examine the state's finances to reach the recommended target of 20% of the public debt by the states to percentage of GDP by 2023, and some of these points can be quoted. Look into the next one, India's population story. Here one important term you should not forget, replacement fertility rate. What is meant by replacement level of fertility? This is quite common, you come across newspapers. Replacement fertility rate is the total fertility rate, that is average fertility rate, that means average number of children born per woman on an average number of children born, and at which a population exactly replaces itself one generation to the next. So, this replacement fertility rate is 2.1 for most of the countries. So, in a rude terms you can say, if a woman is blessed with on an average 2.1 children, then subsequently the population will be maintained and the equality of population from one generation to other generation will be maintained. Now, India is reaching that level. India's total fertility rate, it came down during the past 10 years. As per National Family Health Survey 4, the fertility rate came down from 2.7 to 2.2. So, the replacement fertility rate is 2.1 and we are about to reach that rate shortly. And here two important aspects has thrown because of this article, and before going ahead, two issues I am going to deliberate based on this article. Before going ahead, please understand replacement fertility rate is basically average number of children born per woman at which a population exactly replaces itself from one generation to the next without migration, right. So, here 2.2 at present, 10 years ago it was 2.7. So, next first issue is still the population will grow. As per the definition, replacement fertility rate means maintaining the same population from one generation to the other generation. But because of the high fertility rate during the past 20 years, to 30 years, now we have 365 million population in the age group of 10 to 24 years. So, around 37 crore people in our country are in the age group of 10 to 24 years, and some of them are in the reproductive age, and in due course of time remaining children will come to the reproductive age. So, because of this youth bulge in our country, now what happens? Population is likely to grow for the next 30 years or so. So, the population is likely to reach 1.7 billion by 2050. So, around 170 crore. And we discussed about this replacement fertility rate means this will ensure that the population replaces itself from one generation to the other. Because of this youth bulge, we are going to see increase in population till 2050, and by 2050 our population will be 1.7 billion or 170 crores from at present 128 crores or so. This is one thing. So, fertility reduction in fact is a good sign, but still the population will increase. And here if you look at this population pyramid of India and Japan, you see more people are at young age in our country, more population are at young age in our country. That is why population will continue to grow in future, because this age group is basically either at the fertility either at the reproductive age or they will soon join the reproductive age. But if you look at a country like Japan, the population in the young age are much less. The population of middle age as well as old age, they are increasing, and some of the western countries are in fact aging population is one problem western countries are facing, right. This is one issue we discussed. And second most important issue is north south divide is going to happen. Here in fact the fertility rate has fallen to 2.2 on an average, but if you take some states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh, in these states the fertility rate is still high at around 2.7, 2.8 something like that, and in southern states the fertility rate reduced drastically. So, because of this, youthful north is pitted against aging south. So, the basic problem which we are going to face is the demography is in favor of North Indian states because of more young population, and whereas south is aging. So, aged population is increasing in southern part of the country. So, the young population in fact will be concentrated more in the northern part of the country, and the southern states basically the population is aging. So, it is going to be a mismatch between north and south in the future. So, in the south there will be dearth of young working people to keep up and expand the level of economic development, and hence northern states, if proper investments are made in the northern part of the country, then it will give great demographic dividend, right. It will be win-win situation for both the North Indian states as well as South Indian states, because in future lot of migration is expected from north to south because of more young population here and more aged population here. So, these two important aspects you can look at from this article. Then the next one is a new chapter for the disabled, and if you look at the facts, India ratified United Nations Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities in 2007, and subsequently after 9 years Parliament repealed the 1995 Act and brought in the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. So, Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 came into force on April 19, 2017. Now, the Supreme Court stated that state governments and union territories must prepare an action plan, or you can say 12-week deadline to comply with the provisions of the new law and file compliance reports in the court, right. So, Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, from examination perspective this is important. So, it replaced 1995 Act, and here total disabilities increased from 7 to 21, and some new disabilities were added for the first time. Acid attack victims have been added, and some of the disabilities were added with specific names, and every child with benchmark disability between 6 to 18 years has got right to free education, and reservation in government establishments increased from 3 to 4%. This is very important aspect, and stress has been given to ensure accessibility in public buildings. That is part of Accessible India campaign of the Government of India. So, government and private buildings both must have access to the disabled persons. So, this is the act which came into force few days ago, and now Supreme Court said, please give me the feedback within 12 weeks with regard to the provisions of implementation of new law and compliance reports in the court, right. So, with this we came to the end of editorial discussion, and please enjoy the new format from May 1st and your schedules and your modules pertaining to the revision as well as Q&A discussion. I will take forward with 20 minutes each, because I do not want to waste much of your time, and that will start from Monday onwards. So, Monday onwards 11 o'clock, please do join for revision discussion of for civil services preliminary examination, and we will try to go ahead with item wise, maybe S&T, environment, like that. We will try, but all the weeks it may not be possible, but at least for some days we will ensure in that format. Right friends, please do join for Monday's schedule at 11 AM, and this weekend you will have why and how as well as facts and figures. Have a nice day. Thank you.